They were the perfect family, trusting the woman who cared for their child like a second mother. Marissa Caldwell wasn't just a babysitter, she was part of the family. The Monroes, busy professionals, relied on her to help raise their daughter, Lacey. Every day, Marissa showed up with a smile, helping with homework, making snacks, and tucking Lacey into bed. To the outside world, everything seemed perfect. But behind closed doors, one dark secret was brewing, and it was about to shatter their lives forever. How could someone so trusted, so integral to a family's daily life, betray them so brutally? What happens when the person we trust the most is the one who destroys us? The heartbreaking truth of what unfolded in the Monroe household is beyond comprehension. Before we dive into this chilling case, like this video and subscribe to Inspector Stan for more shocking tales of betrayal, deception, and murder. Marissa Caldwell had been a fixture in the Monroe household for nearly 2 years. At 28, she had everything going for her, an unblemished reputation, a warm smile, and an easygoing nature that made her a favorite in the neighborhood. To the Monroes, she wasn't just a babysitter, she was an extension of their family. Ryan and Dana Monroe trusted her implicitly, relying on her to care for their 10-year-old daughter, Lacey, during late nights, business trips, and everything in between. Marissa had an innate ability to make Lacey feel safe and loved. She wasn't just an employee, she was a friend, a confidant, a second mother. Every afternoon, she'd pick Lacey up from school, help with homework, and prepare her favorite snacks. Their bond was so strong that, at times, it felt like Marissa knew Lacey better than her own parents. She knew which stuffed animal Lacey couldn't sleep without, what bedtime story to read, and how to calm her after a rough day. The Monroes felt a deep sense of security knowing their daughter was in such capable hands. To anyone who looked at the Monroes, their life seemed perfect. A beautiful home, a happy daughter, and the ideal babysitter who seemed like she'd always be there. Nothing ever seemed amiss, no cracks in the facade of their seemingly perfect life. They had everything they wanted, until the day they realized just how wrong they'd been. Beneath Marissa Caldwell's warm smile and glowing reputation lay a sinister secret. To the Monroe family, she was everything they could have ever wanted in a babysitter, sweet, dependable, and endlessly caring. But Marissa's life outside the Monroe household was a far cry from the perfect image she projected. She was deeply entangled in a dangerous relationship with a man named Travis Holt, whose dark past was as twisted as the secrets they shared. Travis was the antithesis of Marissa's wholesome image. Charming on the surface, he had a violent temper and a long history of criminal behavior. His arrest record was littered with charges ranging from theft to assault, painting the picture of a man willing to cross any line to get what he wanted. But Travis's most disturbing secret was his role in a child trafficking operation, a lucrative and heartless enterprise that preyed on the vulnerable. Marissa and Travis weren't just lovers, they were partners in crime. Together, they devised a plan that exploited Marissa's position as a trusted caregiver. To families like the Monroes, Marissa was a godsend, someone who seamlessly stepped into their lives to care for their most precious treasures. But for Marissa and Travis, her role as a babysitter was more than a job, it was an opportunity. The children she cared for were unknowingly being evaluated, their families unknowingly scrutinized for weaknesses. Busy parents, frequent work trips, households that relied on Marissa's help, these became the criteria for their twisted selection process. At first, Marissa told herself it wasn't as bad as it seemed. She justified her involvement, convincing herself that she was just playing a small part, that it was just a job. Travis had a way of making it sound easy. To him, it was all about the money, about creating a future for themselves, and he reassured Marissa that no one would ever get hurt. But deep down, she knew better. Each time she stepped into the Monroe home, each time she smiled at Lacey and read her a bedtime story, the weight of her betrayal pressed harder on her conscience. Marissa's anxiety grew as the operation continued. The Monroes' trust in her was absolute, and that trust became a double-edged sword. Every moment she spent with Lacey reminded her of what she was preparing to do. But Travis was relentless. His obsession with control left no room for doubt or hesitation. Whenever Marissa wavered, he pushed harder, reminding her of the money they stood to gain and the consequences they would face if they were caught. Living this double life took its toll on Marissa. She became increasingly paranoid, constantly looking over her shoulder, dreading the day her secret might come to light. To the Monroes, she remained the picture of reliability. To the outside world, she was a hard-working, devoted young woman. But behind closed doors, she was spiraling deeper into a web of lies, deception, and fear. Marissa's dual existence was a delicate balancing act, one that became more precarious with each passing day. She thought she could keep the two worlds separate, that her secret life would never collide with the life she had built with the Monroes. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and Marissa's was no exception. The trust she had so carefully cultivated was about to shatter, setting the stage for an unimaginable tragedy that would devastate the Monroes' seemingly perfect world forever. It was a quiet evening in the Monroe household, the kind of night that seemed ordinary in every way. Lacey, a bright and curious 10-year-old, had finished her homework and dinner. Marissa, ever the attentive babysitter, had tucked her into bed with her favorite stuffed animal and read her a chapter from her favorite book. Everything about the evening seemed routine, but what happened next would change everything. Lacey had forgotten her iPad in her room earlier that day and decided to grab it before settling in for the night. As she walked into her room, something unusual caught her eye: Marissa's phone, left on the dresser, its screen lit up. A text notification had just popped up, and curiosity got the better of her. The message read: "We moved them in 2 days. Everything set. Asterisk." Lacey froze, her young mind struggling to make sense of the cryptic words. Something about it felt wrong, unsettling. Her gaze darted to the phone screen, and before she could stop herself, she tapped the message. What she saw next made her heart pound in her chest. There were photos of children she didn't recognize, their faces etched with fear and sadness. Some looked younger than her, others only slightly older. Then she saw something that made her stomach drop, a picture of herself, smiling in her school uniform. Below it was a list of names, hers included, alongside dates and strange words like shipment and drop-off. Lacey's hands began to tremble as she scrolled through the messages. Bits and pieces of conversations hinted at something terrible, something she couldn't fully comprehend but instinctively knew was wrong. The realization hit her like a wave: she wasn't just someone Marissa cared for. She was a target. Before Lacey could process what she was seeing, she heard a noise behind her. She spun around and found Marissa standing in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide with panic. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the air thick with tension. "Lacey, sweetie," Marissa said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" Lacey clutched the phone to her chest, her eyes brimming with tears. "Who are these kids? What's happening?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Marissa's expression shifted in an instant. The warm, caring babysitter Lacey had known was gone. In her place was someone unrecognizable, cold, calculating, and dangerous. "Lacey," Marissa said softly but firmly, taking a step forward. "You need to give me the phone and come downstairs. Now." But Lacey didn't move. Fear gripped her, but so did a surge of courage. "No," she whispered. "I'm telling my mom and dad." Marissa's face darkened, her calm facade cracking under the weight of desperation. "Lacey, listen to me. You don't understand what you're doing." "I know enough," Lacey shot back, her voice trembling but resolute. Without warning, Lacey bolted past Marissa, clutching the phone like a lifeline. She ran down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest, heading for the front door. But Marissa was faster. She lunged forward and grabbed Lacey's arm, yanking her back with a force that made Lacey cry out in pain. "Let me go!" Lacey screamed, tears streaming down her face. Marissa's grip tightened. "I can't let you do this," she hissed, her voice shaking with fear and anger. Lacey's small frame trembled as she fought to break free. In that moment, Marissa knew she couldn't let Lacey leave, couldn't let her expose the secrets she had worked so hard to keep hidden. Her fear of Travis and the operation's consequences overtook any shred of humanity she had left. She pulled out her phone and quickly dialed a number. When Travis answered, she whispered frantically, "She saw. I need you here. Now." Lacey's sobs grew louder as she realized just how much danger she was in. "Please, Marissa," she begged. "You don't have to do this. Just let me go." But Marissa wasn't listening anymore. Her sweet, loving act had shattered, and all that remained was the cold, calculated determination of someone desperate to protect her secrets at any cost. The trust that Lacey and her family had placed in her had been replaced by a dark and terrifying betrayal, and the night was about to take an even more horrifying turn. The night turned darker, not just in the sky, but in the actions unfolding within the Monroe home. Lacey, trembling and crying, was held tightly by Marissa as she struggled to break free. The betrayal, the fear, everything was too much for the young girl to comprehend. But what came next would be beyond anyone's worst nightmare. Marissa, desperate and overwhelmed, kept whispering to herself, "I can fix this. I can fix this." She clutched her phone in her free hand, redialing Travis with shaking fingers. Her tone was frantic, her words clipped and urgent. "Get over here now," she hissed into the receiver. "We have a problem. She knows." Minutes felt like hours as the tension in the room grew unbearable. Lacey sobbed quietly, her pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. When Travis finally arrived, the air in the house shifted. His presence was menacing, his expression cold and detached as he sized up the situation. "What did she see?" Travis asked, his voice low and gruff. "Everything," Marissa whispered, her voice trembling. "She knows everything, Travis. We can't let her go." Travis didn't hesitate. He stepped into the kitchen, his eyes scanning for something, anything, that could solve their problem. His hand landed on a hammer lying on the counter, and he gripped it tightly. "Please, no." Lacey screamed, her small voice ringing out in terror as she saw the weapon in his hand. Marissa's breath hitched, but she didn't stop him. She stood frozen, a mix of fear and guilt etched onto her face. Travis moved toward Lacey with cold precision, his expression devoid of empathy. The first blow sent Lacey crashing to the ground, her cries turning into garbled gasps as pain and shock consumed her. Blood spattered across the hardwood floor, the horrifying sound of the hammer's impact echoing through the house. "Stop. Please stop." Marissa cried, but her voice was weak, her protest too little, too late. Travis delivered a second blow, this one fracturing Lacey's skull. Her small body twitched and convulsed, her innocent life slipping away before their eyes. A third and final strike silenced her forever, leaving the room deathly quiet except for the dripping of blood onto the tile. Marissa stood paralyzed, her hands covering her mouth as she stared at the lifeless body of the girl she had once cared for. Tears streamed down her face, but Travis remained unmoved. "It's done," he said coldly, tossing the bloodied hammer into the sink. "Now we clean up." Marissa nodded numbly, too consumed by shock and fear to argue. Together, they worked methodically, scrubbing away every trace of what had happened. They wrapped Lacey's small body in a blanket, placing her in a large plastic storage bin. As if she were nothing more than an object, they loaded the bin into Marissa's car under the cover of darkness. Hours later, they arrived at a remote, wooded area on the outskirts of town. Travis dug a shallow grave while Marissa stood nearby, her arms wrapped around herself as she trembled in the cold night air. When the grave was ready, they lowered Lacey's lifeless form into the earth, covering her with dirt as if burying their sins would erase them. When it was over, they stood in silence, the weight of what they had done pressing heavily on them. But for Travis, there was no remorse. She was just a problem, he muttered, wiping his hands on his jeans. Now she's not. Marissa, however, couldn't shake the image of Lacey's frightened eyes, the sound of her screams echoing in her mind. But she knew there was no turning back. Lacey was gone, and they had to stick to their plan if they wanted to stay free. As they drove back to the Monroe house, Marissa rehearsed her story, preparing to play the role of the devastated babysitter who had done everything she could to protect Lacey. But deep down, she knew the truth would haunt her forever. The night Lacey was reported missing was one of chaos and heartbreak for the Monroe family. When Dana and Ryan returned home, they were greeted by Marissa, sitting on the couch, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her hands trembled as she looked up at them, her voice choked with emotion as she delivered the unthinkable news. "Lacey is gone," she cried, clutching her chest. "I don't know how it happened. I swear, I only stepped away for a moment." Dana's knees buckled as she dropped onto the couch beside Marissa, her face contorted in shock. "Gone? What do you mean gone? She wouldn't just leave." Ryan, standing frozen in the doorway, clenched his fists as he struggled to process what he was hearing. Marissa's explanation came tumbling out in frantic bursts, a carefully constructed story that painted her as the devastated and guilt-ridden babysitter. She described putting Lacey to bed, leaving the room for just a moment, and then returning to find the front door wide open and Lacey nowhere to be found. Dana gripped Marissa's arm, her voice trembling. "Did you see anyone? Hear anything?" Marissa nodded quickly, wiping at her eyes, her breaths ragged. "There was a car earlier, dark blue, maybe black, parked across the street. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I wonder. What if someone was watching the house?" Ryan immediately pulled out his phone, dialing the police. "We're going to find her," he said with quiet determination. "No one is going to get away with this." Within minutes, flashing lights illuminated the Monroe's quiet neighborhood as police officers arrived and began their search. Marissa stood in the background, watching the commotion with a mixture of unease and satisfaction. She maintained her role as the concerned and devastated babysitter, offering support to Dana while subtly steering suspicion toward her fabricated story of a stranger lurking in the area. She described the mysterious car in detail, adding enough specifics to seem believable but vague enough to avoid discovery. The officers listened carefully, taking notes, as neighbors peeked from their windows, shocked by the sudden activity on their usually tranquil street. Dana clung to Marissa throughout the night, her trust in her unwavering. "She loved you so much," she said through sobs. "You've always been so good to her. If anyone could have kept her safe, it was you." Marissa nodded, murmuring reassurances even as guilt gnawed at her insides. Ryan, pacing back and forth, barked questions at the officers, desperate for any updates, while Dana wept into Marissa's shoulder. Over the following days, Marissa's deception grew deeper. She played the part of the grieving, guilt-ridden caretaker perfectly, crying alongside the Monroes, holding Dana's hand, and pleading with the public during televised interviews. The story gained national attention, with headlines focused on the heartbreaking mystery of Lacey's disappearance. Vigils were held, posters with Lacey's smiling face appeared on every corner, and the nation watched, hoping for her safe return. But behind the scenes, the police were growing skeptical. Marissa's story, while convincing at first, began to unravel under scrutiny. There were no witnesses who reported seeing a strange car in the area that night. Surveillance footage from nearby homes failed to capture anyone entering or leaving the house, except for Marissa's car in the early morning hours. The Monroes remained unaware of these developments, clinging to their belief in Marissa's innocence, their grief blinding them to the cracks in her facade. Marissa continued her act, but the pressure was beginning to mount. Each new question from the police, each new search for Lacey, was like a weight pressing down on her. She had built her story carefully, but she hadn't accounted for the relentless determination of the investigators, or the strength of a family desperate for answers. The investigation into Lacey Monroe's disappearance began with a frantic urgency. The Monroe's suburban neighborhood was blanketed with officers, search dogs, and volunteers combing through nearby parks and wooded areas. News outlets plastered Lacey's face across every screen, and social media exploded with theories. The Monroes, desperate for answers, clung to hope as their quiet life became the center of a national spectacle. Marissa continued to play her part perfectly. She stood by the Monroes during press conferences, her tears flowing freely as she pleaded for Lacey's safe return. "She's like a sister to me," she sobbed in front of the cameras. "I would do anything to bring her home." Her performance earned her sympathy from millions, painting her as a victim of circumstance rather than the orchestrator of a horrific crime. But as the days stretched into weeks, detectives began to notice cracks in her story. Neighbors, when questioned, revealed they hadn't seen a suspicious car on the night in question. Surveillance footage from nearby homes revealed something far more damning: Marissa's car leaving the Monroe's driveway around 3 a.m., hours after she claimed to have discovered Lacey missing. When confronted with this, Marissa faltered, her composure slipping. She stammered excuses about needing to clear her head, but the detectives weren't convinced. The real breakthrough came when detectives obtained a warrant to search Marissa's phone. Hidden among innocent photos of Lacey and casual texts with friends were damning conversations with Travis Holt. The messages revealed not only their romantic relationship but also their involvement in a child trafficking ring. Even more chilling were the photographs and lists of potential targets, including Lacey. The evidence painted a horrifying picture of Marissa's betrayal and her role in the operation. When detectives confronted Marissa with this evidence, her calm facade crumbled. She initially tried to deflect blame, claiming that Travis had coerced her into the operation and that she had no choice. "I didn't want to do any of it," she cried. "He made me." But the investigators weren't buying it. They had her text messages, her phone calls, and even voice recordings from her device where she discussed logistics with Travis. It was clear she wasn't just a reluctant participant, she was actively involved. With the noose tightening, Marissa made a desperate attempt to bargain, offering to lead authorities to Lacey's body in exchange for leniency. Her confession came in halting, fragmented sentences, as if she could barely admit the truth to herself. She described how Lacey had stumbled upon her phone, seen the messages, and confronted her. She wouldn't stop asking questions, Marissa said through tears. "I didn't know what to do. I called Travis, and everything got out of control." Marissa's cooperation led detectives to a remote wooded area outside of town, where they found Lacey's shallow grave. The discovery shattered the Monroes, who had been holding on to a sliver of hope that their daughter might still be alive. The media frenzy intensified as the story took a darker turn, with the once beloved babysitter revealed as a cold-hearted killer and key player in a child trafficking ring. As the truth emerged, public opinion turned against Marissa with a ferocity few had seen before. The nation mourned for Lacey, a bright and innocent child whose life was stolen by the very person trusted to protect her. Marissa's name became synonymous with betrayal, a chilling reminder of how easily trust can be exploited. Meanwhile, detectives built an airtight case against her and Travis, ensuring they would face justice for their unspeakable crimes. The trial of Marissa Caldwell and Travis Holt captivated the nation, drawing massive media attention and public outrage. The courtroom was packed every day, with reporters, legal analysts, and members of the community all vying for a glimpse of the proceedings. For the Monroes, the trial was a harrowing ordeal. Ryan and Dana Monroe sat in stoic silence, their grief palpable, as they faced the woman they once considered family. The prosecution presented an unrelenting case. Evidence included the chilling text messages exchanged between Marissa and Travis, outlining their plans and actions with cold precision. The jury heard excerpts of voice recordings where the pair discussed targets, including Lacey. Photos from Marissa's phone showing the child trafficking operation left the courtroom stunned. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Marissa, not as a reluctant accomplice, but as an active and willing participant in a heinous crime. Dana Monroe took the stand, her voice trembling as she recounted the trust they had placed in Marissa and the devastation of losing their only child. Her testimony left many in tears, highlighting the profound betrayal and heartbreak their family endured. Marissa's defense team attempted to shift the blame onto Travis, claiming she had been manipulated and coerced into her actions. They described her as a victim of an abusive and controlling relationship, arguing that her fear of Travis had driven her decisions. However, the prosecution countered with evidence of Marissa's autonomy, showing her eagerness to please Travis and her active role in orchestrating Lacey's murder. Travis Holt's defense was equally unconvincing. His long history of violent behavior and his central role in the trafficking operation sealed his fate. He showed no remorse during the trial, further solidifying the jury's perception of him as a callous and dangerous predator. The most heart-wrenching moment of the trial came when the jury was shown photos of Lacey's grave and the items buried with her, a reminder of the innocence lost in such a brutal and senseless act. The Monroes turned away, unable to bear the sight, while sobs echoed throughout the courtroom. After weeks of testimony and evidence, the jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning their verdict. Marissa Caldwell and Travis Holt were both found guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder, conspiracy, and child trafficking. The judge, in a scathing statement, condemned their actions as unforgivable and sentenced them each to life in prison without the possibility of parole. While justice was served, it brought little solace to the Monroes. They issued a tearful statement outside the courthouse, thanking law enforcement and the prosecution team but emphasizing that no verdict could ever bring back their daughter. "Lacey was our world," Dana said, her voice breaking. "We trusted Marissa with her life, and she destroyed everything. There's no justice that can heal this pain." The trial's conclusion left the public grappling with questions about trust, betrayal, and the hidden darkness that can lurk behind seemingly perfect facades. The Monroes retreated from the spotlight, seeking solace in their grief while trying to rebuild their shattered lives. Meanwhile, the case became a somber reminder of the evil that can hide in plain sight, and the unimaginable toll it can take on the innocent. This case serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of betrayal. The Monroes' story is not just one of heartbreak, but a cautionary tale about the dangers of misplaced trust and the darkness that can lurk behind even the most innocent facades. It reminds us that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, have a way of surfacing, and when they do, the cost can be unimaginable. Could this tragedy have been avoided if Marissa had been honest with the Monroes? What compels someone to weave such a tangled web of lies, and what are the ultimate consequences of living a double life? Perhaps the most chilling question of all is how we can truly know who to trust with what we hold most dear. If this story shocked you, don't forget to like and subscribe to Inspector Stan for more cases that delve into the darkest intersections of trust, betrayal, and murder. Until next time, stay safe, and stay vigilant.